somewhere. When the pieces of apron string were tied tight, about an inch apart on the cord, the midwife took the sharp knife that she always carried for the purpose and sliced it through, separating the baby from its mother with one clean stroke. That's when the baby started to cry, properly cry. Maggie looked anxiously down the bed again as Mrs. O'Dowd took a knitted blanket and laid the writhing baby on it, wrapping her firmly and then cradling her expertly with one arm before walking up to the top of the bed and handing the sticky, crying bundle to the mother. "You did very well there, Maggie," said Mrs. O'Dowd, as she stood with her hands on her hips, watching the mother soothe her baby. Then, seeing the baby open her dark eyes to look at her mother for the very first time, there was no crying now. "Will you look at that, Maggie? She knows you already." Maggie smiled and spoke a few words to her daughter. Mrs. O'Dowd stood for a few moments more, sharing this special time with mother and baby. And then she roused herself and said, "Now, Maggie, you might remember from when your first was born, we need to get the afterbirth out." Moving back down to the bottom of the bed, the midwife thought all was progressing as it should. So she readied herself, only to find that there didn't seem to be anything moving. But there was quite a lot of blood, and it was starting to pool on the bed. "Maggie," she said, trying to keep the rising panic out of her voice, "you're doing very well, but could you try and bear down a little to push the afterbirth along?" I'll try," said Maggie, but she had no strength left to push and seemed to be getting a bit sleepy. The midwife looked again between the woman's legs. The bleeding was steady, and there was still no sign of the afterbirth. "How are you feeling?" said Mrs. O'Dowd, looking up to her face, an element of unease creeping in. Maggie gazed at the midwife and tried to speak, but stumbled on her words. Not so good," she said at last, her voice very quiet. Take the baby, will you?" she murmured, her voice slurring, then tailing off. To her credit, Mrs. O'Dowd stayed calm enough to swiftly remove the baby from the mother's limp grasp. But after she placed her in the wooden crib, carefully prepared with a spotlessly clean sheet, she turned back to the bed to see with alarm that blood was flowing more heavily now, soaking into the mattress. Within seconds there was blood dripping from underneath the bed onto the scrubbed wooden floor. In full panic, her mouth dry and her heart racing, Mrs. O'Dowd did her best to try and grasp the afterbirth and deliver it. When this didn't work, she stuffed a ball of cloth up the birth canal to try and put some pressure on to stop the bleeding. But nothing could be done. The afterbirth was stuck fast. The bleeding was torrential. And within minutes, she was watching in horror as Maggie's face and hands turned white, and her life ebbed away. Mrs. O'Dowd stood helpless, a sob rising in her chest. This had happened to her before, more than once, a woman bleeding right in front of her eyes, and she knew that there was absolutely nothing she could do about it, nothing at all, except go to the top of the bed and hold on to the woman's hand, hold her fast. And in no time at all, Maggie was gone, and the room was silent except for the drip, drip of her blood onto the wooden floor. The midwife stood for some time with her head bowed, still holding Maggie's hand. When she came to, knowing there were things that needed to be done, she looked down